Hello, welcome to this lecture on social psych. We're going to start this unit by looking at ways in which humans interact with each other, the way they perceive and develop attitudes and judge one another. This unit is very interesting. It talks about all these concepts here, and we go through a variety of social situations, interactions that we deal with every day. Why do we not help people when they drop something in the hall? Why do we follow the leader? What happens when humans are in large groups or small groups or by themselves? How does that change the way humans interact with the world around them? So we're going to kind of start small and work our way up through this unit. You can see the topics here. We are going to skip over aggression and attraction. It's no longer in AP Psych, but I have linked readings here if you want to look at those topics there. But yeah, it's a pretty interesting unit. So here's the College Board language about what you need to know. So make sure you kind of keep this in mind. Look for the words that are kind of stick out there. Again, you know some of these, like you probably know what a stereotype is, but we're going to kind of just go over it again. And that takes us to our first slide, culture. When we talk about social psych, the overarching kind of like organizing schema is culture. Culture varies from location to location, from time period even. Cultures can change over time. There can be big cultures and micro subcultures. But overall, culture just refers to the behaviors, ideas, and values shared by a group that is usually passed down from generation to generation. But it can also change from generation to generation as well, and morph into different cultures and things like that. Typically, in psychology, you need to know two types of cultures. This contrasts with sociology, where I think you do like a whole subculture assignment. But in AP Psych, we have to know what individualist cultures are and collectivist cultures are. We've talked about this already, just to kind of reiterate. Western individualist cultures or individualistic cultures tend to value individual personality traits, unique characteristics that humans have that make them stand out from the rest. Getting gold medals and getting individual success. Those are valued much more in individualist cultures. Now, that being said, while individualist cultures do celebrate individual achievements a lot and at a great extent, there is still some celebration of group achievements. The opposite is true for collectivist cultures as well. Collectivist cultures tend to celebrate and value group cohesion and people working together and people not really making too much of a fuss or making things about them. They tend to value group success and working towards group goals. If you look at the world, 66% of the human population lives in a collectivist culture. In Asia and Africa and lots of South America and Central America, we see collectivist cultures really thrive and dominate. Whereas in Europe and North America, we kind of see individualist cultures kind of dominate. Again, these are just kind of trends. You can have an individualist person living in Japan. You can have a collectivist person living in America. It just kind of depends. Overall, we see these cultures and cultural trends kind of dominate. One thing that is new is the idea of the just world phenomenon. The just world phenomenon is a trend that kind of goes along with this, with people getting what they deserve. I'm sure you've been around people you've seen this on the news, or maybe you've had friends or family members say this when they've witnessed someone get in trouble or someone get attacked, that they deserved it or they had it coming. If in the recent news, you might have noticed that people in Minnesota have been attacked and killed by federal agents for standing there and doing nothing. Maybe having a phone out or something like that. They were stand and killed for filming or being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Almost everyone is kind of condemning those violent acts of murder against an innocent bystander, an innocent civilian who's just trying to help out. But some people, especially in online circles where there's going to be lots of anonymous behavior, anonymous posting and messaging and things like that, people have said that that person had it coming. Well, that's an example of the just world phenomenon. That just because someone did something that you don't necessarily agree with or you think might have been wrong, that they deserved it. Um, if you look at this case here, this comes from your textbook. Um, Judges gave a violent offender a lighter sentence when a scientist testified that a gene had caused violence and aggression, kind of showing that people can't change their circumstances and situations, so they deserve whatever outcome they're given. Um, so you see again these kind of examples of people getting what they deserve, even though there's really not a lot of evidence for that. In the world and the media around us and things like that, kind of coming in and becoming more and more popular as people kind of get further and further away from evidence and scientific belief and things like that. Multiculturalism is, again, this kind of belief that we place value on different cultures and people coming together. America at times can be multiculturalist, but you have kind of this white nationalist trend in American thought and action that is kind of valuing white identity and things like that above all others. But traditionally speaking, America is pretty multicultural for the most part. We're supposed to be a nation of immigrants and migrants and things like that, but in recent years that has kind of gone out the window as politicians kind of push multicultural trends forward. Just to kind of wrap up this slide on culture, we have tight cultures in which people are supposed to closely follow social norms, and then loose cultures where people don't have to follow those social norms as closely. A social norm, if you're not familiar, is kind of an unwritten rule in society. So when you go in an elevator and you stand and you turn around, that's a social norm that you don't have to do that, but that's what most people do. Um, you know, Unless there's a sign, walking through a drive-through. Technically, most places that have drive-throughs don't have signs saying you must drive through. That is changing, according to social media trends and things like that. But previously you could just walk through a drive-through and they would serve you. That is more or less becoming a rule now, not just a norm you must follow. All right. So how do we make these judgments about people and kind of see something happen and just make a judgment right there? Well, this is kind of the next topic we're going to look at, and it goes along with person perception. How do we perceive people? How do we change perceptions of people? And how do people we perceive kind of compare to other? And the first part of this is an attribution. Attributions are explanations we use to explain the way someone is acting. So why did this event happen? Why are we seeing this behavior? What are you doing to explain this? You can be you could add style to your explanation. You can give a certain a twist to the way you would explain something, depending on your personality and the way you view the world. For example, you can have a pessimistic explanatory style, saying negative things like I'm no good at this, I suck, it's all my fault, I'm not getting any better. Or you can have an optimistic explanatory style that is you saying that you're going to do best and better, and you're going to work harder, try harder next time, no matter if it's a good or bad event. If it was a good event, you would say maybe I got lucky if you're pessimistic, or if you have an optimistic style, you said I worked really hard to get this. It doesn't matter what type of event it is, it just depends on the way you explain the outcome. That's kind of what we mean by explanatory style. But when we talk about attribution, besides the way we kind of phrase it and word it, which is kind of what the explanatory style term comes from, we need to look at attribution theory. Typically, when we blame our behavior or place our behavior, the effects of our behavior on something, it's either based on the situation, like the environment, or enduring traits that person experiences. So again, this is kind of an interesting theory, and it's an interesting development of the old nature versus nurture dichotomy and debate we often see in Psych. So with attribution theory, again, there's two ways to kind of approach this. There's a dispositional attribution or a situational attribution. Dispositional attributions mean you're kind of, again, attributing that behavior or event or whatever to personality traits that are stable and unchanging. If you're making a situational attribution, that explanation is related to the environment and the situation. So let's look at this example with Billy here at the bottom. Billy is talking nonstop. let's make a dispositional attribution. Well, if you made a dispositional attribution, you would say Billy is talking nonstop because he must be an active, talkative person. That's a part of his personality. That's who he is. So that's dispositional. If you say Billy is talking nonstop, he must be nervous about the test next bell. That is a situational attribution because you're saying he's nervous because of the environment he's in. He's worried about what's coming up next. So again, those are the two main types of attributions you can make. And normally, once we make an attribution, we usually stick with it. We don't usually second guess ourselves or doubt ourselves. We can do that. Some people do that, but for the most part, we kind of stick with our original attribution. Here in this cartoon from the Boondocks, you can kind of see an example of that. Here we have Huey kind of talking about the system is failing us. There are systemic problems. We cannot succeed because the system is set against us. There's no way we can perceive. There's no justice. There's no fairness. Our fates are thrown to this flawed system that is kind of keeping us down. And then Riley jumps in and says, there's nothing wrong with your joystick. You're just really bad at video games. So Huey is saying here that everything that's going wrong in the world is because of the system. This environment is out to destroy us and manipulate us and do us in, do us wrong. Riley says, no, it's not that. It's you're bad at video games. So he's making a dispositional attribution. So you can kind of see people view events differently through different lenses, and that can kind of lead to, again, this dichotomy of a situational versus a dispositional attribution. One common error that people make, kind of alluded to there with the cartoon, with the Boondocks, is something called the fundamental attribution error. This occurs when we overestimate the impact of a person's disposition or their traits on behavior, and you underestimate the situation's effect on that person's behavior. So to rephrase this, if you're always blaming the way someone acts on that person's personality, their natural characteristics, or who they are or what they are, you're overlooking. That's kind of a common trend. If someone's being mean, you're going to call that person mean. Or if someone's being rude to you, you're going to call that person rude. When you do things like that and just make those snap judgments like that and attribute someone's behavior to their personality, you could be making the fundamental attribution error. Some people truly are mean or rude or silly or goofy or talkative or whatever attribute you want to, or whatever thing you want to attribute to them. But when we do that and totally overlook the fact that environments have just as much of an impact on human behavior, that could be a sign of the fundamental attribution error. When you just totally overlook that situation, when you call someone rude and overlook the fact that person is maybe acting rude because they're in a stressful environment, that is the fundamental attribution error. Let's look at an example, classic example of the speeding crazy car driver. So let's imagine you're on the road and someone speeds in front of you, drives past you, overtakes you on the road, and just zooms past you. The traditional, reaction to that all of us would immediately make is a dispositional attribution, saying that's a crazy driver. That person's crazy. What are they doing? And that could then lead to some negative results of you maybe trying to race them because if they want crazy, I'll show you crazy, and you do the same thing back to them. But if you're just making a snap judgment there, calling them crazy, that's a dispositional attribution. If you, however, have the thought that says, oh, they're speeding, maybe they're sick and they're trying to get to the hospital because they just cut their arm or their finger or something like that, or maybe they're really worried about what's going on, or maybe their wife's in labor or something like that. If you make a situational attribution and say this person is speeding for a reason, it's because of their environment and the situation they're in, that is a situational attribution. The fundamental attribution error occurs when you just say that person is crazy without considering the fact that maybe there's a situation or some environmental anomaly going on that is causing that person to do that behavior. All right. So again, this next time you see and you make a judgment about someone saying, this teacher is angry or acting crazy, you should also not fully just make that judgment right away that person is a crazy person or an angry person or a silly person. Maybe look at the environment. What kind of environment is that person in? What are they going through? Why are they acting this way at this moment in time. Now, if this trend continues over a long period of time, then you can kind of lean towards more of a dispositional outlook on that person, saying this person is always silly or always angry. Maybe there's an angry person. But if it's someone you don't really know too well, or you're just meeting them, or there's a special situation going on, you need to pay just as much attention to that special situation rather than just labeling that person as being silly or goofy or angry. All right. Other things kind of related to this is the actor-observer bias. Um, as you kind of saw with this cartoon, if I go back a slide here, all right, Huey and Riley are kind of looking at the same situation. Huey is making a situational attribution, and Riley saying, no, it's not the system, you're bad, you suck at video games, you don't have it in your nature to be good at video games. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what it is. But they were both looking at the same situation. Actor-observer bias kind of is a thing really similar to that. Actor-observer bias says that we explain our behavior versus the behavior of others. If both of us do the same thing, the actor and the observer, we might say that, if something bad happens to us, for example, let's say we both take a test. If we both do poorly on the test, right? You might say that I did poorly because it's not because I'm unintelligent or I'm lazy and didn't study. It's because the teacher hates me. If I don't do well on a test, it's because the teacher hates me. You're going to make a situational attribution to that, saying, this teacher hates me. I had to work late last night and couldn't study. Blah blah blah. However, if you also do bad on the same test that I do bad on, you're more likely to say you did bad because you're dumb or stupid, or you're unintelligent, or you're lazy. This is a trend in human nature. When you see similar outcomes in both yourself, the actor, and the other person, the observer, or vice versa, depending on your perspective, you're going to make, again, attributions that favor you and make them more based on situation rather than make them based upon your own disposition or your own personality. So another example, okay? Both of you and a friend apply to a job. If we're kind of looking at this through the lens of the actor-observer bias, and let's say neither you or your friend get the job, you might say, I didn't get the job because the manager hated me. I didn't really the interview questions were really up to my strengths. They didn't really make sense to me because they didn't really fit with what I'm looking for. You're gonna make something else that is kind of along the lines of a situational attribution. However, when you also don't get the job, you're more likely to say things like, oh, you didn't get the job because you probably gave bad answers, or you didn't really think your answers through, or maybe you didn't answer the questions of the interview correctly. That's not how I would have answered them. Again, this doesn't happen all the time, but bits and pieces of it can, because we're not likely to call people we're close with or talk to, things like unintelligent or wrong to their face. That's not really in human nature. But you're more likely to kind of go in that direction in small terms as we kind of operate in the world. Last kind of related topic to that is something called the self-serving bias, where when we're just talking about our own accomplishments and not talking about other people, really, we're more likely to make attributions that favor ourselves when we have successes, and kind of push the blame off on us when we don't have successes. So you can see the example here. You do well in the history test because you studied hard and you're intelligent, but you say if you take a chemistry test on that same day, you did poorly on it because it's unfair. So again, you're more likely to make dispositional attributions to serve yourself and say that you're a smart, intelligent person, and you're more likely to make dispositional attributions when you don't do well. Again, self-serving. I couldn't do on this test because the teacher hated me because the questions were not what we kind of studied in class, or whatever you might say. And again, that's a self-serving bias. I have a chart here that kind of walks you through these three things. So again, self-serving bias mostly explains your own situation, successes and failures. Actor-observer bias kind of explains our and others' behavior. And then the fundamental attribution of error only applies to others' situations and things like that. All right. Belief in what we can or can't do is related to the topic of locus of control. I might have spoken about this before. You, of course, know what self-esteem is, but locus of control kind of is a part of our personality, and it kind of helps us kind of develop long-term belief on our ability to succeed, depending what type of locus of control we develop. If we develop an internal locus of control, that's traditionally a more healthy outlook on the world. The internal locus of control is the belief that our actions, our thoughts, our behaviors are in our control. That whatever we do, good or bad, will help us, will direct outcomes in our life. And again, when you have this type of locus of control, this leads to a healthier outlook on life. If you don't believe that you're in control of your destiny, of your situation, of the world around you, that can lead to feelings of hopelessness, despair, depression, and things like that. And if you believe nothing is in your control, that's going to lead to you to stop trying and learn helplessness and things like that. So when it comes to internal locus of control, you want to kind of stick to an internal locus of control if you can. But it's kind of related to personality, and there's not much we can do to change our personality, at least at this point in time. One thing you might want to keep in mind too is the mere exposure effect. This can be related to our exposure to people and social environments, but also objects and particularly songs. And actually, the best example of the mere exposure effect comes to music and songs. Have you ever listened to a song multiple times and you kind of didn't like it on the first listen, but by the fourth, fifth, sixth, or seventh listen, you've grown to really like it and enjoy it? Well, that's the mere exposure effect. It's also related to the human attraction as well. When people kind of regularly run into one another and become, meet each other over and over again, they're more likely to become attracted to one another, whether in a romantic sense or as a friendship sense. But the mere exposure effect is that outcome. When you're exposed to people, places, things, songs particularly, over and over and over again, this makes you more likely to like and appreciate those things over and over and over again. Lastly, I'm sure you're familiar with this term, self-fulfilling prophecy. This is a very well-documented trend in psychology as well, particularly educational psychology. If we believe something is going to happen as humans, where we believe something is going to happen, that belief in itself can make it more likely to happen. Let me give you an educational example. This happens all the time, and teachers are taught about this time and time again, about having high expectations for students. Basically, if a teacher, hears from another teacher that a student is bad, mischievous, did this or did that to kind of act the wrong way or behave the wrong way, that teacher is more likely, whether they realize it or not, to look for those behaviors and therefore assume that that student is acting in that bad, negative manner, regardless of how the student's acting. Most students want to set a good example and have a fresh start from year to year and do their best to be a good student, assuming that everything in their life is relatively stable and they're not going through trauma or something else like that. So the self-fulfilling prophecy here is this belief that can kind of push people, usually like in an unconscious manner, to kind of look for things or to do things or act in certain ways that kind of leads them to eventually getting that behavior that they're expecting. So again, if you're told a student is going to be bad, you're going to maybe act more negatively towards that student and kind of start a relationship in a negative direction from day one. Another example from the student perspective, right? If you get told a teacher is going to be mean, you're more likely to treat that teacher maybe in a more negative sense and kind of be a little bit more strict and demanding of that teacher, leading them to then kind of react to you in a similarly negative way. So self-fulfilling prophecy can be pretty powerful as far as what we kind of see is as far as reactions and expectations and things like that. All right. Okay, social comparison, comparing people to one another. How do we compare each other, our successes and failures? Social media is a really big part of this. Social media really does cause people to get like FOMO, fear of missing out, and to get these things that compare themselves to each other, compare ourselves to each other, I should say. It's really unhealthy and can lead to self-esteem issues and things worse than that. Meta, the owners of Facebook and Instagram and places like that, they did a study on themselves and kind of proved it, that getting access to social media, especially in the teenage years, can lead to bad outcomes and low self-esteem and things like that. So social comparison happens all the time, and it's been around forever, even predating social media, and it can lead to usually pretty not good outcomes. So let's look at some examples. Judgment. Judgment is when you just have a perception of something and you form a conclusion about that person, place, object, or idea. Usually, judgment in itself is not bad, but when you judge someone, you might not have all the facts. You might just look at something very quickly and just kind of jump to a conclusion or a judgment, and it could be right, it could be wrong. But usually when you don't have all the evidence or the whole story or the other person's perspective, you're usually not making the most accurate attribution or judgment about the situation. Going down that rabbit hole, we're going to get to something called prejudice or prejudgment. This is usually a judgment that is made about someone from a different, from a specific racial group, religious group, gender, or sexual orientation. And usually with prejudice, almost always with prejudice, you're going to get a negative attitude towards that person because of the previous knowledge and experience that you have. And usually this is where racism and discrimination and things like this come in. So there's three components of prejudice when you do have prejudice against someone or something. Number one, negative emotions, hostility, fear, etc. So like I said, almost always when you have prejudice or prejudgment, you're basing it on your prior knowledge and experience of this person's race, gender, sexual orientation, whatever. And usually along with that comes negative emotions. Additionally, we might also have stereotypes. Stereotypes are generalized belief about a person or about a group. Sometimes they can reflect reality, but usually they are just meant to kind of harm and kind of put people in bad situations. So for example, traditionally speaking, because of history and culture over time, when you look at a family, a traditional family with a husband and wife, the husband will go to work and have a job. The wife will stay at home and cook and take care of the kids. That is no longer true, especially as cultures change over the time. But that is kind of the stereotype in Western culture because of history and changes over time. We are seeing that is a stereotype that people hold and often kind of look for. Other stereotypes you might see in regards to men and women, that men are better drivers than women are cleaner than men, etc. Kind of going along that traditional cultural stereotype of what a men's role in society is versus a woman's role in society. They can of course get much more hurtful and racist and things like that when we talk about different ethnic groups or religious groups or things like that. People stereotype, not always again to outwardly be hurtful and negative. Sometimes people stereotype because it's easier. When you're grouping people or grouping situations, you can reduce the amount of thinking you have to do when you can just say all men are good drivers. When you can make a statement like that, it requires you to think less and have to put less thought into that process. So that is one reason why people do it. People also do it because when they want to justify their actions, it's easier if you have a stereotype or something in your back pocket you can just pull out when you need to justify an action or a belief or a prejudice. The last piece of this is discrimination. So prejudice and stereotypes are usually, I should say almost exclusively, just kept in the head. They're cognitive thoughts that you have about, or judgments that you have about someone or something, right? Discrimination is when those thoughts and beliefs kind of leave your body and become an act. So a discrimination is a behavior. It is something you do to people that is based on your stereotypes and your prejudice and your negative feelings based on hostility and fear. So when you support a law that takes away rights from an ethnic group, or when you support, or when you commit a hate crime, which will never happen, but at least amongst you guys, hopefully. But when you commit like a hate crime, for example, that could be an act of discrimination. You're attacking this person because of their race, gender, sexual orientation, whatever, and you're doing this because you have beliefs, stereotypical beliefs about that person. You can see some examples down there. The most famous one is the Airbnb example at the bottom there. This is a well-documented study. People that make Airbnb reservations or Uber pickup requests, they are more likely to get picked up and treated with respect when they take a stereotypical, white-sounding name such as John or Emily, rather than a stereotypical black-sounding name such as Jamal or Lakeisha. When this happens again, you can't really hide the data here, and it's a pretty easy experiment to do. But you see again people associating minorities with certain beliefs or behaviors or situations, and having those thoughts in their head. That's an example of prejudice or maybe stereotypes, depending if they think that all people of a certain race act a certain way. But when they kind of deny that Uber pickup or when they deny that Airbnb reservation, that is an act of discrimination. And you can again see these as big, kind of actions such as, refusing to pick someone up in an Uber, or it can be kind of small microaggressions such as, an eye roll at someone when they make a pro-black statement or something like that. So again, prejudice is, an attitude that's in the brain. Stereotypes are kind of generalizations about a certain ethnic group or gender group or whatever, and then discrimination is the act of acting on those beliefs in a negative fashion. We have some what would you do situations. It's pretty interesting. We'll look at that in class, hopefully. Two types of prejudice we have here are explicit versus implicit prejudice. We can act in prejudicial manners or in ways without really knowing that we're doing so. We can be hidden to the fact that we're acting in a negative way towards, again, a certain group or people or situation. Explicit prejudice refers to being fully aware of your actions, knowing that you are being prejudiced and discriminatory, eventually maybe. Implicit prejudice is when you're kind of not as aware that you might have some prejudicial thoughts or attitudes. A way to kind of test this out is through Harvard's implicit association test. It's just one such example in which you can kind of test your implicit prejudice, because it gives you it kind of measures your knee-jerk response to certain situations based on race. I wouldn't put too much weight on it. It's not the most scientific thing, because you're kind of probably be doing this in class or at home in a not laboratory-like environment. But if you want to try it out, you can kind of see how implicit prejudice is measured. So yeah, let's move on. You can read some facts here about the improvement of racial attitudes over time. We still have some ways to go, but we do see over time some prejudicial things improving for the better. However, things do there are still lots of work to be done, particularly in attitudes towards people of color and people from the LGBTQ plus community. So some work has been good, but we still have a ways to go in that world. Here's an example of the implicit prejudice test, and kind of like what things you might kind of look at if you take that test. Where does prejudice come from? Again, we talked about the just world phenomenon, that people get what they deserve, that people who are from a certain group or class or race, they deserve what they get because it's just what is owed to them because of that thing they can't change. I won't spend more time on that. Another reason why we have prejudice is because of our social identity. In psychology and social psych, you have in-groups and out-groups. The in-groups you belong to are the other cultures, the groups, the societies that you kind of see yourself as a part of. So, you, the student, you're a member of the Walnut Hills community, you're a student, and you live in Cincinnati. Those are your in-groups. You're a teenager, right? You have a friend group. Those are your in-groups that you belong to. The out-groups are the teachers, the parents, the adults, the people not from Cincinnati, the people from, I don't know, Mason or Westchester or Kentucky or Columbus or, New York. Those are out-groups. So we're more likely to look at in-groups with a more positive lens, seeing how things are, how we are more alike and more similar because we're part of the same in-group. Our school versus Mason High School, for example, We are the in-group because we all have similar beliefs and similar identities. We live in the same part of the city. We all kind of want to see the same things happen, such as Walnut Hills being a great school with a great community. When we look at the outgroup, though, and that's Mason High School, we all kind of look at them as the same. That's called the outgroup homogeneity bias, in which we see the outgroup is all the same, sharing the same beliefs, attitudes, etc., which is not true. There's probably people at Mason High School that have similar beliefs to us, or really don't like Mason. There's probably people inside Walnut Hills that don't like Walnut Hills. Not everyone inside our group has the same beliefs, but we can see that, we can understand that. But when it's the out group, we tend to not see that as easily. We see the out group as all in the same, with unique thoughts, feelings, and attitudes, which is what can lead us to making prejudicial statements and stereotypes and things like that. Additionally, there's the other race effect. When we're talking about race, if we're and this is usually scientifically proven, it's more easy for us to identify differences in members of our own race versus other races. This can be physically or emotionally or personality speaking or whatever. But again, when you see other people as all one and the same, it's easier for you to kind of come up with prejudicial statements and attitudes about other races and identities and things like that, which is another reason why we see discrimination and racism and things like that happen. Additionally, too, like I said, the self-fulfilling prophecy is a part of this as well. If people believe that members of a certain gender or race are going to act a certain way because of the stereotypes that they have, you're more likely to kind of see those things happen or maybe help cause those things to happen. Another thing kind of related to that is the idea of the scapegoat theory. When things go wrong in a society, in a culture, such as the COVID pandemic or economic downturn, people look for someone to blame. And you're never going to see people blame the large, powerful people in charge, governments and the leaders and whoever. You're going to see them blame small outgroups, people that don't really have a lot of support or a strong structural presence in society. You see this happen all the time. Again, it's almost always directed towards ethnic, religious, or gender-based minorities or members of the LGBTQ plus community, right? So it's just two examples of scapegoating that we see happen. Following World War I in Europe, when there was a big economic downturn in Germany, who did many Germans blame for their loss? Jewish people. Jewish people were blamed, leading to the rise of the Nazis and the continued rise of anti-Semitism in Europe. In America, we see Asian Americans blamed for COVID. People believed that the COVID pandemic came from China, that China created it in a lab and it spread around the world. Therefore, that all Asian Americans were responsible for this. And you see just tons of incidents of anti-Asian American prejudice and discrimination in the time following the beginning of the COVID pandemic, with a startling statistic of 650 acts of discrimination incidents in 1 week following a particular week in the COVID pandemic. So, again, this stuff is alive and well, unfortunately, and it's still continuing today, as COVID has not gone away and people still remember COVID because it just happened a few years ago and it's honestly still happening, right? People are still getting sick with COVID today. Other reasons for racism and discrimination: ethnocentrism. It is the tendency to view your own ethnic or racial group as superior. And when you view your group as superior, you're going to view other groups as inferior. Again, similar to what we saw in Nazi Germany, similar to what we saw what we see in America. We have these white nationalist groups saying they're superior to minorities, ethnic and religious minorities. And then relative deprivation. When we compare ourselves to each other, that can lead to exacerbating feelings of prejudice and stereotypes and discrimination. So if you're a poor white person that harbors some racist attitudes and beliefs, when you see a person of color on social media in a wealthy situation with money, with power, with leverage, you might then have those feelings of discrimination exacerbated, right? When Barack Obama was elected, there was tons of white resentment and the growth of white nationalism in that period because all these people who'd had some light racist beliefs around black people and people of color. They saw someone of color become president, and that just exacerbated those beliefs in some people that, again, already had those pre-existing beliefs. So relative deprivation can definitely lead to an increase in that regard. All right, that is it for 4.1. That's a lot there. We'll take a look at these Paradic questions here. We'll go over these in class. I'll put them up on the screen. You can pause and look at them to see if you can figure these out. I believe that is it. All right, we'll pause there, and then I will see you guys next time.